Hi, welcome to the latest installment in this video series on Irish genealogy, Irish ancestors, the site, the people, the experience, the theme park. Today I'm going to be talking about 19th century census substitutes. These things, census substitutes, are much more important for Irish research than in most other places because basically we blew up all the real censuses. So all these fragments are most important. Today I'm going to be talking about some of the most important 19th century ones. Again, I'm going to use my site as a jumping off point. So let's go there now. Right, here we are at the site. The browse section is free. It contains most of what's in the latest edition of Tracing Your Irish Ancestors, the 2019 edition. And we're going to go into the 18th and 19th century section of the census records. So these are census substitutes. And the 19th century column starts here. I'm not going to go through all of these. Some of them are very familiar, Griffiths and the Tithe books and so on. But I'll skip through them. First of all, the 1803 agricultural census is an interesting one. 1803 was during the Napoleonic Wars, and there was a big scare on that Napoleon was going to invade Ireland, and these Martello towers were built around the coastline to watch out for the French ships on the horizon. In Antrim and Down particularly, the scare went a stage further, where they actually planned to withdraw all supplies from within about 10 miles of the coastline. So they were going to withdraw all the crops, all the livestock, all the people, to sort of deny the invading French their supplies. It was a bit extreme, but in order to do it, they carried out what's now known as an agricultural census. In other words, they listed all the cows, they listed the people, the householders, the cattle, the number of sheds, the level of crops, and so on and so forth. They haven't survived for everywhere. Most of the ones that have survived are in the papers of the Marquess of Londonderry and available in Prony, with 50 down parishes covered. Some of them are transcribed on this website, Bill McAfee's, and you can see the 1803 here. So he gives you can download it as an Excel or as a PDF. There are also some in the National Archives of Ireland, copies in the official papers. The best guide by far is Ian Maxwell's Guides to Researching Armagh and Down Ancestors. The Down ancestors in particular goes through every parish where these things have survived and tells you where they, whether they include names or whether they're just lists of agricultural implements and crops, and it might be interesting to know how many cattle your ancestor had, but it's not going to tell you who his ancestors were. Anyway, the next in chronological order is the reproductive loan fund records. The loan funds were an early form of microcredit. They were actually invented by Jonathan Swift in the 18th century. The idea was that you give a small loan to somebody in order to buy a cow, and they then sell the milk and the butter and pay you back, use the cow to pay back the loan. So they're productive loans. The important part of it that Swift nailed was that the guarantor is your neighbor. So in other words, if you don't pay back the loan, your neighbor goes to jail. All right, and that's talk about incentivizing people. It certainly did, and it's the model that was still used. It was used in Bangladesh, in the Grameen, and various other development loan systems, where the responsibility for payment is in the community. So you're letting your community down. You're not letting some faceless bank down if you don't pay it back. There was a kind of a craze for these in the early 19th century in Ireland. It seemed like a wonderful way for people to bootstrap themselves out of poverty. That didn't quite take into account the fact that the majority of people who were most in need of the loans had no experience of money pretty much at all. They weren't part of a cash economy. And certainly in terms of the reproductive loan fund, I've seen what looks like the same people going from one loan committee to the other, and maxing out credit card by credit card, so that it wasn't always well managed. This particular organization, the reason that the records have survived is that it was based in London. It was based in London because it was set up in the aftermath of a localized famine in 1822, a sort of rehearsal for the 1840s Great Famine, where the crop failed in various very poor areas in West Cork, in West Connaught, in Donegal, Sligo, Leitrim. There was a relief fund set up in London, and the idea was they collected lots and lots of money, a couple of £100,000, an enormous sum for the time. But by the time they'd collected it, the famine was more or less over. So they decided to use the fund to set up this reproductive loan fund system. How it worked was that there were local committees, generally staffed by bigwigs, by local landed proprietors or justices of the peace and so on. People applied to those for loans. The committees were funded from London. They owed the money back to London. So there was this chain of responsibility, and the committees loaned out to individuals and collected the money and passed it back up to London. There were hundreds of these things in those areas, in Roscommon, Leitrim, Donegal, Mayo, Sligo. You can see there's a list down here of the main ones. One of the problems about using them is that they don't correspond to parishes. They don't correspond to any, they were just local. So, which is one of the reasons why somebody in Galway could wander from Ahasca to Ballygar to Castlehackett to Clifton and get a new loan in each place. And anyway, the system was a bit ramshackle, but it produced loads of records. The reason they survived is the records went back to London. They went back to London when the real famine hit in the 1840s, and the system sort of collapsed under the demand, under the sheer scale of need. Then they went back in 1853 to see what had happened to their money. They sent the local constabulary, the Irish constabulary, not yet royal at this point, but the Irish constabulary went around to the addresses that they had been given when the loans were given out and wrote down what had happened. So you have this wonderful before and after record where, John Murphy lived in Ballymore. His loan was guaranteed by Michael Murphy and Peter Donoghue, also of Ballymore. So you have a sort of a mini census substitute there. And then in 1853, it says died in 1847 or went to America in 1850. I mean, so you get lots and lots of small little stories. They're well worth, for those areas, particularly the areas they're covered, they're well worth looking for. And they're easy to access now. The full collection is on Find My Past. They haven't called them Reproductive Loan Fund records, I think because Reproductive Loan Fund, the title was chosen by the organization in the sense that the loan was going to reproduce itself, not that they were giving loans to people to have even more children in 19th century Ireland. So I think they thought reproductive might produce more confusion. So they're called Poverty Relief Loans and Sustainability Fund Loan Fund. But they're the same basic records. The records are now in the Public Record Office in London, in Kew, and Ancestry and Find My Past have digitized them. They haven't digitized exactly the same records. So if you have access to both, it's worth going at both. Okay. National school records. Unfortunately, the national schools ran, and they're still running. This is what in the south of Ireland in Republic, we still call them national schools, primary schools. The system was set up in 1831, and it was run under the Board of Commissioners for National Education. The roll books can be really, really interesting. Unfortunately, in the 26 counties in the south, these were never state records. They were never the responsibility of the Public Record Office or the National Archives, even though they have collected them to some extent. The real juice is in Northern Ireland, where there are more than 1,500 registers of schools. And again, for areas now in Northern Ireland, that's Antrim, Armagh, Tyrone, Fermanagh, Derry, and Down. So those, if you have an ancestor in those areas, the school records can be really useful. They're in the Public Record Office, and I don't think they've been digitized. There are other records also produced. There are salary books for the teachers, and again, most of what the National Archives of Ireland has are those, and those have been digitized. Okay. And a certain amount of the registers from the National Archives collection are on findmypast.ie. Again, they're for the Republic of Ireland rather than the North. But the really big collection is in the North. Okay, the last of these things I'm going to talk about are workhouse records. They were set up, workhouses were set up in 1838. There was a big controversy about whether or not the Poor Law should be extended to Ireland. The Poor Law was an English and Welsh institution, different in Scotland, but an English and Welsh institution where the local parishes were responsible for feeding the destitute. Basically, it was an institutional system of charity. The real question was, in Ireland, that system couldn't work. It would bankrupt the parishes immediately. The sheer scale of poverty and deprivation was well beyond the English system to cope with. So a slightly different system was set up here with workhouses based in large market towns, and their economic hinterland was their sort of catchment area. And they were responsible for providing indoor relief, in other words, admitting people who were completely destitute, or in some cases outdoor relief, organizing work parties who would be paid by the day. So the idea was to do the minimum possible to stop people actually starving to death. And as the famine showed, they didn't actually achieve that. But there were 138 of them, 130 of them initially, rising and changing slightly over the course of the 19th century. They had admission registers, and they had what are called Board of Guardian minutes. The Board of Guardians were the administrative controllers of the workhouses, and their records were published, and they've all survived. The admissions registered, in lots of cases in the Republic at least, that they were treated as badges of shame, and they were quite, swept under the carpet, kept out of the public eye. So very few of them have survived. By far the biggest are the ones for Dublin City. There was a workhouse in North Dublin, a workhouse in South Dublin, and the admission registers for those have largely survived, and they're on findmypast.ie. The best source for checking quickly what registers there are and where they are is this workhouses.org.uk. This is an extraordinary life's work. A historian in Cambridge. He has workhouse locations, Irish poor law unions, and you get all of them here. Let's see, for County Roscommon. So one of the problems about them is that Castlerea, okay, forget that, close. Okay, it gives you a map, a location. This is close to where I used to live, in Castlerea. It tells you the basic history of them. It tells you the number of guardians. It tells you if there are any records. Okay, and there aren't any for this one in Roscommon. But it's a good and easy way of checking the availability, the survival of records. As I say, that the most of the survivings, there are some for Sligo, there are some for Donegal, in the county libraries. Find My Past have digitized some of those as well. Ancestry had some of them as well. Again, you like so much else in Irish research, you need to check what survives. The biggest problem, one of the things about workhouses and the poor law unions, the areas that they covered, is that they ignored parishes and they ignored county boundaries. They were designed to produce a certain amount of tax. There was a poor rate levied on property owners in the area. And the idea was they would be self-sufficient. This wonderful Victorian idea of taxation and the people in the area being responsible for paying for the services in the area. But it means that they are a bit doolally, as it were, when it comes to locations, and that has implications as well for the civil registration of births, marriages, and deaths later, because when that started up in 1864, it took the poor law system as its basis. So, and it's still, the poor law system is still the basis of registration of births, deaths, and marriages in Ireland, which is weird. But anyway, I think I've whittled on long enough. I've given you some food for thought, I hope. And all I can do is encourage you not to give up, keep worrying away at it. If you don't find it in one place, have a look in another place. And above all, be lucky. Okay, thanks for watching. Till the next time.